Thank you, Speaker. I am honoured to rise today to talk about the life of the Honourable John Delzoppo OAM and the contribution John made to the electorate of Narracan, this Parliament, and his much-loved community of Neerim South. It's fair to say we don't get many state funerals in our area. I think John's might be the third that I can recall, but no one deserved it more than John himself. But I would like to start just by mentioning the government's representative at the funeral, our Deputy Speaker, the member for Ashwood, who in my opinion, and I know John's wife, Beth, agrees with me and the family do as well, did an absolutely amazing tribute to someone he hasn't met but reflected the attitude or the sentiments of the community, and it was a very heartfelt and sympathetic contribution. It was very, very well received. So I'd like to personally thank the member for Ashwood for his contribution on that day. John was a loving husband and partner in life of Beth for an amazing 69 years. Dearly loved father of Ian, Lindsay, Claire and Anne, and their partners Mary, Jan, Gavin and Martin. Loved grandpa to Emma, Amy, Sophie, Kathy, Nick, Ali, Evan, Alex and Sarah, and their partners Christian, Brendan, Julian, Sophie, Matt, Fernanda and Ray, and loved old grandpa to Zara, Luca, Alba, Arthur, Winnie, Maverick and Charlie. Well, I got through that. That was a fair few people. As has previously been stated, John was elected to the seat of Narracan in 1982, but ironically did serve on the Bullen Shire from 1966 to 1986, and that overlap of 4 years between being a councillor and an MP is quite amazing. I'd like to see someone in this chamber try to pull that off today, see how you get away with it. But he served his community with passion for many, many decades, and he never wavered from that passion. But his time in Parliament was an interesting time in Parliament, and he had some interesting journeys along the way, Speaker. I will say this, that most of us in Parliament, when we get up to do a contribution, we like to think we're right. Well, unfortunately for John, on one such occasion, when he was the Shadow Minister, I believe, he'd only been in the Parliament 2 years, but a story came out. The Thompson Dam was under construction at the time. And the story came out and John got a whisper that this was going to happen, that the Thompson Dam was going to burst its banks and it was going to flood from Walhalla to Bendigo, the way John would have described it at the time. But unfortunately for John, he wasn't quite right. The Thompson Dam was only about 11% full at the time, out of a million gigalitre dam was only 11% full. But what was funny about this story was back then the media used to have an annual event, and described in the newspaper, I have to go to this, it's the Polly of the Year Award, described in the newspaper on the day as being bigger than the Brownlow and more exclusive than the Emmy. John won the award that year, and he received from the media team, he received a plunger, a plug and a book titled Dam Busters. So it was quite an interesting story, but John's passion was his community, and no more so than the Neerim South Hospital, which John went out there, he fundraised for the hospital, in best words, hounded the architect and eventually got this hospital built, which is still there today. And to give you an idea of how respected John was, and I've got to tell this story, on the day of his funeral, a very, very cranky constituent of mine, Jenny Muir, was driving past the hospital, and John had a very close relationship with Jenny. He used to call her Little Blondie, but she was very upset when she got to the hospital and the flag was not at half-mast. And it was fair to say the staff in the hospital copped both barrels from Jenny at the time. I can't repeat what she said verbatim because it would be very unparliamentary. But John had a unique way of dealing with being a speaker too. It might come, and Speaker, maybe you might want to use this tactic every now and again. John would, when the chamber would come quite rowdy, John would simply get up and walk out. Really simple. And there was one day when, believe it or not, a belligerent Jeff Kennett, and I can't believe Jeff would be belligerent, but John and Jeff had a fairly robust discussion for hours and the chamber was left empty. So maybe, Speaker, if we get too rowdy, you can just go have a cup of tea. But that was the type of man John was. He was about the job and he took the job very seriously. And it was interesting when we referenced John used to wear the traditional dress, and he did. But there is some interesting stories about the traditional dress. So John, when he decided to do this, it was actually from a colleague of his that suggested it. Said, John, you've got to wear the traditional dress. And he said, why? He said, because you have to separate yourself from the rabble. That's us. So John said, all right, I'll do that. Now, John had a bit of trouble. He had to get his mother to give him a hand to put the tights on, for starters. So Mum was out there helping John get his tights on and everything else. And of course he had the wig as well. But Beth had one complaint about the wig. It used to make his ears smell. So unfortunately for Beth, she had to put up with smelly ears. That was quoted by Beth, by the way. So, yeah, we are, but I thought I'd just talk about the type of man he was and what he did. Now, there's another funny story about John's time in that Speaker's chair as well. His secretary, Margaret, had a fondness for ducks. Now, one day, apparently there used to be ducks on Parliament out the back. One day when John had come back to the chamber after doing his duty, he found all the ducks in his bath. Margaret had decided to collect the ducks up and put them in the Speaker's bath. So he took that in his stride as he did. Yep, he used to be a bath in there. But one of John's passions was fishing. He loved fishing. He was a fly fisherman and he would get out and try and fish any time he could. But for as long as I can remember, although it is getting opened up at the moment, but for as long as I can remember, you couldn't fish in the Tarago Dam or the Tarago River. Well, according to John, wombats always get through the fence. So John always went down there, pulled out a few trout, and I think for the service he'd given to our community, we can forgive him for that. But he was very, very passionate about his community of Nearham South. He loved the community. Him and Beth served in that chemist for 31 years. And it's not a chemist like we have today where you go up and you just get the pills given. John used to make the medicines out the back. Quite an amazing feat, and with Beth, they worked in there for 30 years in that chemist out at Nearham South, supporting the community out there. He loved his community of Nearham South, as he did. He loved his Anglican church as well, and for many, many decades, John was the one responsible for picking the bishops, and he would give them quite a hard time to make sure they deserved it. He was a great, great local man. And it was represented at his funeral when we had former Liberal Party leaders there, of Jeff Kennett and Alan Brown, and the member for Hawthorn was there as well, and former members Gary Blackwood, Ian Maxfield, and the Honourable Steve Crabb as well. Now there is this is how loved he was by this chamber, and it's actually quite interesting. When Steve Crabb was the Minister for Transport and John was the Shadow Minister for Transport, John's daughter Anne married Steve's son Martin. So that would have been an interesting Christmas dinner at that time, but I've been rest assured they never talked about politics. But John was very much loved in this place, even to the point where an attendee in the upper house invited John and Beth to their wedding. That's how much he was loved within this place. But his two passions, two of the things he loved the most about being a member were Deb Balls and fire brigades, CFAs. John and Beth went to every Deb Ball they possibly could, and they were like the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. They could both dance very, very well. But their love was so great that they would sneak into other electorates and go to their Deb Balls as well. And I imagine today that wouldn't be received too well, but back then it was. But he loved also his fire stations and the CFAs, because he felt that was a real sense of a community, a real sense of volunteers coming together, community coming together to look after their local community. And that was one of his greatest loves as well. He will be very, very sadly missed in my area. I know when I won the election, before I could even figure out how to log on my computer to the parliamentary system, John and Beth were at my door. And John sat down and gave me all the all the secrets to being in opposition, which I won't share because I don't want the government to know. But John was that passionate about, he was passionate about the Liberal Party, he was passionate about the seat of Narracan, and he was so pleased when I'd won the supplementary election that he was there front and centre. He was the first person to come and visit me. So to Beth and her family, we thank you very much for sharing John with us. He was a great local community advocate. He was unparalleled in his passion. Our community and that of Neerim South benefited greatly because of his passion and the difference he made. For that, on behalf of the people of Narracan, I thank you very much. Vale, John Delzoppo.